Hey, Kelsie.
Hey, Brooke.
Want to tell everyone what's happening in today's episode?
Brooke, today we're going to talk about, well, I'll be honest, I'm going to drop a bomb on you today.
What?
And we're going to talk about the inquiry model for instruction, which sounds really boring, but I'm going to tell you.
I'm already asleep.
Hey, I'm going to tell you why I'm opposed to critical feminist theory.
What?
Yeah.
Let's get into this now.
Hello, and welcome to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%, the podcast that explores what happened to the women in history class. Now, here's your host, Kelsie Brooke Eckert, and her partner in crime, Brooke Neva Sullivan.
All right, so Brooke.
I need all the things. Give me everything. What? All right, wait. So the bomb that you're dropping is?
I don't agree that we should be teaching critical feminist theory in classes. So though I think more people are familiar with critical race theory and critical feminist theory are basically the same, just swap out race and insert gender.
Okay, I'm following you. And so this is a big argument right now.
Yeah.
In the world. So let's set the scene. So critical race theory for the last, what would you say, 4 years, 5 years?
Yeah.
Has been a huge debate. And
states are passing laws about it, including New Hampshire, where we are. It's super controversial. And
essentially, critical race theory is saying...
Let me break this down. So I have a great study here from the University of North Carolina Press. It's titled Perceptions of Teaching Race and Gender. Unfortunately, I can't link it for people because it's behind a paywall, but you can find it on JSTOR if you have access to JSTOR. The authors are Martell and Stevens, and they did this study in Massachusetts. But in the theoretical framework that they use for breaking down the study, they provide sort of the general concepts that are included in both critical race, CRT, and critical feminist theory, CFT. So there are 5 tenets, and the first one, they say that race and gender are social constructions that are invented by humans to maintain power relationships. First of all, I want to say, I don't really disagree with that, right? That that gender and what we expect of people of different genders are social
It's interesting
construct.
they didn't put US attached to that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's true everywhere in the world.
Okay.
But then they say, yet race and gender also appear natural to people because they're so entrenched within the social order. And actually, I teach my students examples of things like that, like when in class. So like every girl in the room has long hair. Why?
Huh?
And it's like you don't even, people aren't even conscious of the conformity to that. And it's not always true. Of course, there's always like one boy with really long hair and like one girl with short hair, whatever. But those people are outliers. The second tenet is sexism and racism are normal, yet wrong, because they are a permanent part of society. And so sexism and racism need to be unmasked and exposed.
And so critical race theory or critical gender theory are basically saying we have to unmask.
We have to unmask this stuff
to expose these things
in our classrooms.
Yep. I mean, I think most of our listeners are like, yeah, I can agree with that.
Yeah. I don't necessarily disagree with that.
I don't love the word unmasking. I feel like that's pretty aggressive, but I think you have to get aggressive with some of these topics because they're not changing.
Yeah. Counter narratives are necessary tools for analyzing the common culture of race and gender as they confront dominant interpretations that are often portrayed as objective. I also don't disagree with that because people who've been listening to us along the way know that we are big fans of multiple perspectives, right?
Bring it all in.
Bring it all in. So I don't disagree that we need multiple perspectives, but the way they're phrasing it, like counter narratives, just seems kind of aggressive to me. These last two, I think, are the trickiest ones. So liberalism problematically prioritizes incremental over sweeping social change. As a prevailing social paradigm, liberalism has led to painstakingly slow progress for women and people of color. Our system, our government system, is designed to be slow. Like it's designed to be conservative. It's designed to pit two parties against each other so that they're essentially
to the death
ineffective
until the next generation has to do it.
Yeah, and the next generation will also be ineffective. So I don't disagree with that, and yet there are lots of examples where this point is not true, right?
Okay.
Like where change actually happened pretty quickly on different issues. we had an episode about mothers against drunk driving.
Oh, yeah.
That's a really cool example of like a counter to that, where everybody seemed to be on the same page pretty quickly. So that's kind of neat. All right. And the fifth tenet is advances in civil rights for people of color and women have, and this is the part that's tricky, have only occurred when there was interest convergence, where basically
both parties.
Yeah. Everybody is sort of agreeing at the same time. And they say where these interests, the interests of people of color and women are ultimately also serving the interests of whites and men.
Makes sense.
So it's tricky because it's like this, the only way to, it's so negative, right?
Yeah.
And yet there are definitely examples where that's not really true either. And so here's why. So you can hear, like, I don't disagree with these tenets.
No, but you have healthy question marks.
I have healthy question marks. And I know that there are, and I think it's tricky because, like, these are presented as, like, overarching truths. And, like, nothing.
Yeah, it's like
nothing is ever, like, always or never, and I think those sort of, like,
for this to be true, it's always.
Yeah, like those sort of sweeping claims, I just think are really problematic, because that's not that, like, I would never be like, Brooke, you're always anything. Like, I would never say that to a person, even if that quality is something that I attach with you. So we certainly shouldn't be doing that about our society, and especially a society as diverse as ours, with multiple states that have different laws.
Do you feel like they're doing that, though, to really call it out and create change? Like, if we don't call it this, if you don't name it, like, you know how it's like, if you don't name it, you can't define it, you can't, research it, do the thing. So they're naming it, and they're like, now pull it apart. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's a really important thing to have, like, perspectives to say, like, this is always true, so that it can be, like, we can find conversation about it.
Yeah.
But I guess my real opposition to this is that I am very opposed to teachers preaching to students about things. And I think that...
Well, I think you've always been on that. It's like, I'm not trying to preach. I'm trying to bring you along with me here. And, like, what's the style that all of our lesson plans are in? Is inquiry-based.
Inquiry-based. So I want to talk about the inquiry model. The inquiry model was adopted by the National Council for the Social Studies. It is a model for instruction where you pose a question to students. And I think all 5 of these points could be questions.
Totally.
Like, turn them into questions. And what's very cool about the inquiry model is that it is entirely possible that every student in your class could walk away with concluding these 5 points. Right? That, over and over and over again in U.S. history or in world history or in our government class, we see this to be true, right? That liberalism prioritizes incremental growth.
Yep.
Ta-da. But we don't teach, like, people don't learn well when someone's preaching at them. And one of the things that is crucial to these ideas, critical race theory, critical feminist theory, is critical. Critical is the part that's there. So I think that if a teacher came in and was like, these are the 5 things you're going to learn about race and gender in my classroom, it's like, you're not actually being critical about it. You're countering what is the norm that says, like, women have to adhere to these social norms. And by the way, that norm is reinforced in our schools everywhere. The pictures that teachers put up on their walls show girls in, like, certain roles and boys in other roles. There are fewer pictures of, like, female, people in history that are posted in history
just
classrooms.
Look at your school administration. If there's not a woman in leadership, it's probably true.
You're sending a message every single day that women don't belong in leadership. Those things are there and they're normalized. It's really difficult to then, if that's the world people are in, to then come in and say, the world you are in is exploitive and wrong and da-da-da-da-da, because, like, that's normal for people.
Yeah.
And so what we do is we walk them through the evidence, right? That's
and we make
problematic
them,
and wrong.
As students, be their own investigators, like, really think about their own experiences, how they apply. and question. And it's like, is that right? Like, I think I've seen you like talk about this with your students too. It's like, okay, here's the overarching question. Is that right? Is it wrong?
Yeah.
How do we know? What should we bring in?
And I think that's the position that teachers in classrooms should be in. We're the questioners.
Yeah.
We're curious. We're modeling curiosity, because the reality is you have 12 years to teach students everything that they need to know to go off and be adults. And that's not enough time. Right.
Well, and really what you're trying to give them is the skills to do it themselves and be perpetual learners in society. And you've talked about this, like the role of social studies teachers is creating good citizens.
Creating good citizens, creating good thinkers, right? People that are going to go out and think. And if you stand up in front of your classroom and are like, these are the 5 tenets about race and gender that everyone needs to memorize, like that's not creating good thinkers, not creating good citizens.
You can see why people are outraged about critical race theory. You can see, I mean, the extremists I cannot see. You're on your own. But the ones that are like, maybe we should question this and maybe we should think about how this is being presented. You're right. You should always think about how things are presented to your students. You should constantly be interested in what your students are learning and how it's being presented, because it hasn't been inclusive for a long time.
Yeah.
And now you're saying you don't want it to be inclusive more.
Right.
That's dangerous.
And I want to make sure I make very, very clear. I think the laws that are being passed blocking critical race theory from being taught and critical feminist theory from being taught, I think they are toxic. Yeah. I think the people that are presenting those laws in state governments are disconnected from reality. I don't think that most middle and high school teachers are teaching any of this shit in class. I think this is mostly like a collegiate level, and it's a legal framework for learning about law. So I want to make very clear that like I think those people are doing harm, because what they're doing is they're scaring teachers from talking about race and gender in the classroom, and like shame on you for presenting these laws. Stop telling professionals what to do in their classrooms.
Well,
you
said this to me once and I really liked it. It's like, oh no, like that person can get up and speak at a like a hearing or a public hearing or whatever. Do they have a teacher's degree?
Right.
Are they certified?
Right.
Oh, they're not. Mm-hmm. So I'm all set.
Yeah, right.
Like whatever that opinion is. Mm-hmm. Like if you haven't done it, if you don't have the thing, if you haven't tried the hard moment and walked through that with someone to challenge it, you have to come from a perspective of, I don't know, teach me. And if you can't, that means that you actually got missed in school too.
There's a lot of people who like literally have never been in a classroom as a teacher and think like, oh, because I was a student one time, I get it. It's like, no. I would never, like, I've been to doctor's appointments before. I'm not going to like perform your surgery, like, oh my God, like, no, like that just doesn't compute.
Yeah, it doesn't compute. Well, so I like the bomb you're throwing out, and it's an interesting one.
So, and I want to make very clear that I'm not saying like
don't do it.
I'm not saying that these ideas are wrong. Like there's lots of evidence to support that. But what I'm saying is I think students will get there if you show them the evidence rather than if you share your conclusions.
If you come in, wait, you got to say it again.
So if you come in with your conclusion, this system is sexist, everybody hates women, it's oppressive, da-da-da-da-da. There's going to be kids sitting in the classroom being like, well, I love my mom. And, or, families like my spouse's where the mom was the matriarch, like you didn't mess with her. And so like, if your teacher comes in and is like, women are oppressed, they'd be like, no, they're not. Have you met my mom? She dominates, like you're going to immediately alienate people in your space
versus inviting them in.
Let's ask a question. Is the United States system inherent, is world culture inherently, misogynistic or sexist or something like that? And just because you're asking the question doesn't mean the answer is prescribed. And I think it's nuanced, right?
Yeah.
Like it might be true, it might be more true in some regions of the United States than others under certain laws, under certain systems.
It becomes geo-focused as to what your norms are in your society where you live.
Yeah.
That's
I'm sure there's people listening being like, but everywhere in the world, women are oppressed. And it's like, yeah. Like
you're not wrong.
We know that. Show them what that means. Because when you start saying women are oppressed, people are sexist, things are misogynistic, and they don't have like real world examples of what that means. Like, I'll give you a real world example, kids.
Yeah.
You ready? 12% of men qualify for paternity leave in the United States. 12%. So what that means is that 88% of families, if the woman has leave at all, which, welcome to America. But anyway, 88% of families, when they have a baby, what happens is mom stays home for
X amount of time. Because there's probably not daycare, affordable daycare.
Right. Mom stays home for whatever amount of leave that she has from work, or she quits her job, right? Like one of those two scenarios happens.
Yeah.
And here's what happens within that family. And studies show this. Families where the couple is relatively egalitarian going into having children, they split domestic tasks 50-50. What happens is this. Dad goes back to work. Dad's working a full-time job. He's exhausted from his life, because we all are when we work full-time jobs. Mom's at home doing all of the domestic tasks because that's her job now, and she does all that stuff. And then 6 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever your leave is later, she goes back to work. And dad's like, hey, it's been great while you're doing all that domestic shit. And she keeps doing it. So now she's doing domestic tasks on top of full-time job. And the system created that.
Yeah.
The system said, hey, dads, you do you, go back to work, provide for the family. Mom's got all this domestic stuff. The system said moms are better at childcare. As a woman who had postpartum depression and was basically incompetent for 6 months of my life, no, women are not naturally better at child rearing, just so you know.
Yeah. And there's so many studies out there that actually the brain reacts the same to a child, like a baby crying. I love this study. I actually think there was a documentary on Netflix, which I'll figure out what it's called. But it's a study of the brain and neurology. And when a baby cries, people always thought women have better hearing.
Yeah.
Or they're more attuned to a baby crying. Actually not true.
Yeah.
Actually, the brain reacts exactly the same way, male or female, to a baby crying. So there is no innate response to crying.
Yeah.
It's just in our culture that women hear it more. Or that I always hear it. My husband doesn't. Not true.
Not true. Dad, level the fuck up.
No.
No,
and to the dads who are, keep going.
Keep going.
But it's really interesting that there's really, and then like, maternal instinct. There was a whole study around like bonding, and especially around hetero couples, but to gay couples. People are so concerned. Like, there's no woman in the house, or there's no man in the house, and are there going to be same roles?
What will they do?
They have the same bonding connection.
Same bonding.
Male or female.
Yeah.
Children don't bond better with a mom or a dad. It doesn't matter. It's whoever's giving them love.
It's care.
It's care. It's making, like they call it the love bubble. Do you remember this when we were talking about babies? Like, it's when you hold a baby 2 feet from your face, like right in your face, like that little snuggle bubble, and you make direct eye contact. It's called a love bubble.
Yeah.
And whether you're male or female, it does not matter. Whether you're aunt, uncle, grandparent, whoever's giving that to the baby, it's like crack. The baby's like, it's all these endorphins go flying through their little brain. They're like, I'm obsessed with just you. Doesn't matter if you're male or female. That happens to any baby. That's an attachment.
If you're mom. I mean, that's how babies form attachments to adoptive parents, right?
Exactly.
So, I mean, let's go back to the Ingray model, though. If we came in and we said the U.S. system, is oppressive, people are going to go, what? Give me examples, right?
Or they're going to be like, yeah, that's true. And then people are going to be like, how do you know that's true?
Right. And like, I mean, it's so hard. Like that example you gave of people saying like women are designed to, somehow
or
like
so much more nurturing. It's like
nurturing.
Actually not.
Yeah.
Not
I
true.
can't tell. I mean, I was in the like throes of postpartum depression, and I had so many. I mean, I can't even count how many older men came up to me and they were like,
ew,
isn't it just magical how your body just knows what to do? I'm like, my body doesn't know shit. like, sorry.
My body is a science experiment.
Actually, you saying that to me is now, on top of already struggling with postpartum depression, now I'm feeling guilty because you're telling me that I should magically get something and I don't.
Oh, yeah. It's even, like, I mean, there's so many of those examples, which is really frustrating. But I think it's, working in human resources. So I deal with like gender equality all the time. Like, how do we make sure that every benefit we offer, every policy we have in place is gender neutral, that we are offering the same to any person who works for our company, no matter their role, their status, whatever, equity in all standings.
Yeah.
And we run up against, I talk to other HR professionals and they're like, yeah, but like women just need more time. And I'm like, we're done talking now.
Yeah.
If you're not offering the same amount of leave to the men in your company as the women, then we're done talking. Like I can't, you're not of my cloth.
Right. And if a woman needs more time for medical leave, right, that's a different type of leave.
We have different leaves for that. And men could use it too.
I had 2 surgeries postpartum.
Right.
Which like my husband didn't. So, like, I deserve more time than he did, but I deserve more medical time, not maternal time or something, you know?
Well, I can remember it with our first son. I had 16 weeks leave, and I was like, okay, that's a lot of time, me and a baby. And I, for those who listen and know, I love my job. I'm like obsessed with work. And I was like, can I go back? And I can remember going to my OB's office, and I was like itching. I'm like, I don't want to be home anymore. Like, I love my son. This is not about love. It was about genuinely enjoying what I do for work. And that fills me up in a different way. And I missed it.
Yeah.
And my OB was like, go back to work. Yeah. Who says you have to take 16 weeks? I'm like, well, they give it to you. And I feel bad for all these women who don't get it. And she's like, that's not your problem.
16 weeks. That's awesome.
It was awesome. And
I'm sure people in Europe are listening like, oh, you
idiots.
Americans. 16 weeks
But also
nothing.
like, who's this idiot who wants to go back to work? And I'm over here like, I had so many projects. And I had a male counterpart in my role at the time who was working on very similar projects. And there was this very competitive moment where we were both up for this promotion. And me stepping away in that moment really took a hit to my potential career growth.
Yeah.
And I could feel it.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I don't want to return in 16 weeks. And he's finished every project I started and he's taking credit for all the things I've done. And I could just see 16 weeks out. And I was like, I can't just sit back. And so just having my OB being like, go back.
Yeah.
Go back. You don't have, and I was like, the giving permission was such a weird moment. And I was like, okay, I am. And my husband's like, yeah, I still have the whole summer. He's a teacher at the time. I still have the whole summer off. I'll stay home. Like, you've got this. Go. And I was like, okay. And like the next day putting my maternity work pants back on because I was still not healed from giving birth.
Oh my God.
And I was okay with that. I was like in the car driving to the office. I was like, yes.
I wish people could see how smiley you
I was,
are
I
and
had
lit up.
Goosebumps. I was like, got my coffee. I had my laptop. No one was crying. I was like, oh my God, this is the best.
And you knew that your child was in the safe care of a parent who had
leave
and had time
had time. And I got back to the office and I like double middle fingered the guy in there. I was like, back, and like crushed it and got the promotion over him.
Did you really?
Oh yeah,
you're such a badass.
He left that job, but it's so hard to be second fiddle in that. But it was one of those moments where
one thing I want to also throw out there though is like, I think it's really cool that lit you up. But I also think going back to the idea of systems.
Yeah.
Like, how sad is it that you were like, I'm going to lose out if I don't go back?
And that happens to women
you're excited about work.
Time.
You are excited about work. And so it's a kind of a different story. But there's also a piece of that story where you're feeling a little bit of anxiety about losing out on these opportunities. And I think that anxiety is created by a system that says you are on vacation while this guy's working.
Totally.
And you weren't on vacation. You were caring for a 2-week-old.
I was building a family. And the funnier thing is like 2 years later, that individual, former coworker, had a child.
Yeah.
And deeply knew that anxiety as well, missing out on a potential opportunity. And we had a really wonderful discussion. He was like, cool. I can't believe that you did this at a younger age and I'm now doing it at an older age and I'm still feeling this. And I was like, everyone does this though. And like to have that perspective of like, this actually happens to everyone who feels like they are in a moment where they have to step away from their job. And how do we, and I'm in human resources, how do I in particular make sure that people feel good about stepping away from their job and like, we've got you.
Yeah.
When you come back, you've lost no ground.
Yeah.
And when you come back, if you need to work part-time, if you need to transition slowly, if you need to figure out what new normal looks like and you can't run at the clip that you were running before, because let me tell you, working without kids, you can run.
Yeah.
Working with kids, there's a different priority structure and you have to figure out what that new normal is.
But it doesn't make you less engaged.
Exactly.
And also, like, I find as a worker, like, I work less for sure, like hours of a day.
Oh, sure. But I work harder in the
very efficiently because I'm like, priorities, and then I'm like really in on the things rather than like these tertiary things that I don't necessarily need to be doing.
All the water cooler moments. You're like, see you later. I literally don't have time for that.
Yeah.
What I do have time for is 6 projects, these by that.
Yeah.
You're like, you just use your time a little differently.
Yeah.
But it also is just understanding those perspectives. But I think those norms come in everywhere. And if we don't challenge them from a classroom starting point, they're going to continue.
But if we don't investigate, if it's not an open question,
right?
If it's, let's look at the system and see how it's oppressive, it's like, no. Start with the question, is it oppressive?
Right.
And then, like, let's go through, and does the system promote sexism? And the example of only 12% of dads qualifying for leave, that is the system. That is employers. That is the government saying, we prioritize mom having leave. And like, I don't even know what like gay male couples do in that scenario, right? Like,
well, if they work for great companies, which, good for them, they get the same leave as women.
Right. So it has to be an investigation. It has to be a question, not a dictation. And in fact, like all research in social science knows that the way you ask the questions is really important because you can lead people to conclusions in the way that if you ask the question in a certain way. Now, young people, like middle and high school students, do need help understanding what these things mean. So like, maybe pause and like break that down as a class. And like, what does it mean when only 12% of dads, like what are we saying about who's responsible for children?
Yeah.
Right. And who's we, and maybe people just need to be more thoughtful about the companies they work for. And we can select, we can select into those or whatever.
But I also think private organizations can turn the tides. It's a similar thing where if the states make enough laws, you can flip federal. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with companies. If private companies do the right thing, all companies have to start doing it because
competitive.
It becomes competitive. Exactly.
Yeah, you're going to get the best employees.
There's this huge movement of build equity. They will come and they will move. And that's how we're doing it from a corporate perspective. And so from a teaching perspective, it's probably very similar. It's like, if I get enough scales to tip the tides, we'll get this train. It's like, here we go. Let's keep moving this down the tracks.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've done at RHP is we've posed questions to students. Every single one of the lesson plans that we build is let's ask a question that is, and my criteria with the inquiry model is that the question needs to be dire. That's my acronym. Okay. So it needs to be debatable.
Yep.
It needs to be important. It needs to be researchable. So no, like, did aliens create sexism? Like, stop.
Okay. Hey, I could go down that hole.
Hey, okay. So, and then E, it needs to be enduring. Okay. These come from the C3 framework. And the enduring one is really hard in history classes because not every historic event like is immediately relevant today,
So actually, let's do an exercise really quick.
Sure.
Let's take a topic.
Yep.
And you help me build a question right now.
Sure.
Okay. So let's do suffragettes because everyone loves that one.
Okay, cool. Suffrage. So we have a few actually already on suffrage on our website. I won't tell you what they are. But when I think about suffrage, there's a few like major, so if the first thing is debatable, right?
Yeah, so let's make that.
So where are the debates in the women's suffrage movement? Well, first of all, we know that there are suffragists and we know that there are anti-suffragists.
Okay, so there's a debate.
Because of that those two groups exist, we know that there's a debate.
Okay.
And the debate at the time is different than the debate we should be having in retrospect.
Right.
But the debate at the time was, should women have suffrage? Right?
Okay.
Should women have suffrage?
Is
really,
that dire?
if you look into the sources, like what anti-suffragists were critical of is having an uninformed electorate, meaning like a lot of the criticisms, and these, by the way, these are written by women as well as men, is, okay, so women can't like actually hold jobs in certain industries. So why should women voters be involved in passing laws about train operations and, you know, like being a naval officer and da-da-da-da-da. And so the concern is not that the voter has a vagina. It's that the voter doesn't
have the experience
know and have the experience to make an informed vote, right? All right, fair enough. That's actually kind of interesting because we see that contemporarily, right?
Like, sure.
People argue about, you know, the idiots that are voting, da-da-da-da-da. So a debate is like, does adding women voters create an uninformed electorate? Right? But then again, we have examples like, you know, men passing laws about women's bodies. And fun fact, they're an uninformed body passing laws, right?
So the inquiry-based model, so it's dire.
Yeah, so it's debatable, right? Like should we have an uninformed electorate? And like, does women create an uninformed electorate? Like, no, because there's no requirement that men have degrees or a diploma in order to vote prior. So we already had an uninformed electorate. People were way more illiterate then than they are now, right? So like it's a debate that was had. People were concerned about it. Like, should I be allowed? Like, I'm an educator. I work in the social studies. So should I be able to vote on issues related to engineering? You know, like I do all the time. You know, right? Like, so that's a good debate. Another debate is about racism within the suffrage movement. Okay. So we have a great inquiry on our website about, actually we have a few versions of it looking at racism in this period. We actually got a really angry email.
You're doing well when we get angry emails.
Yeah.
My favorite are the trolls on our Instagram.
Oh, yeah.
Please come more of those. I love them.
I don't know if they're real. Like,
I love Alicia on our board who just is like, bring it. I'll debate you till the cows come home.
So this person was really upset that we were even asking the question about racism in suffrage because she was basically saying like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, like these are icons in the women's movement. Like, why are you trying to knock them down? And I'm like, lady, you got to be open to a tenet of Enlightenment thinking. Being enlightened is being open-minded, right? Is it possible that Susan B. Anthony, whom the 19th Amendment is named after, is it possible that she was also racist? Yeah, she lived in the 1870s. Like,
it's possible.
It's possible. It's possible that I'm racist right now. Because I'm a white woman living in rural New Hampshire. You know,
like our place of privilege is X.
Yeah.
Of course, we have to question our influences. And could that be true?
Yeah. And like, is my intent to be racist? No. You know, like, of course not. But intent and reality can sometimes be different. Yeah. So, like, we have to be open to asking the question.
Yeah, until there's equitable experiences, racism is always going to be a question. Like, there you go.
Yeah.
Bring it in. Debate it.
But ask the question, right? Yeah. Like, don't necessarily don't assume that Susan B. Anthony was racist. Let's look at the evidence.
Was Susan B. Anthony racist?
Right. Let's look at what she said. Let's look at what and Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they're best buddies, but like one might be more than the other, right? And like, let's look at what they actually said in the moment. They did say things that, included racial slurs and things like that. And, some of those you have to like put in time and place. Like,
well, that's exactly. We always have that contemporary lens. So you have to bring in of the time. Was that racist still?
Right. Was what they were saying considered racist? And then also like, even if it was, did that make it okay? Like those are the types of those sort of things you have to keep asking, right? It sort of creates this like question snowball that builds and builds and builds. But one thing in that whole issue in that period is Frederick Douglass, actually, who's the most prominent abolitionist in that period. He's one of the first Black men to be an ambassador for the United States.
Held a pretty high regard.
Yeah, he defends both of them. And that's kind of tricky. Like, I don't know what to do with his defense because they are saying these things, and yet he comes to bat for them, even though he disagrees on like what policies then
you bring in so many debates, like because African American men got the vote before white women. Yeah, was he like, well, if we get white women, we can get African American women the vote? Yeah. Like,
Right.
So what was his plan? And you can ask all these questions. Like
keep asking questions.
Keep going. It's like, and you could debate because you don't know. They're not here to tell you their own narrative.
Yeah.
You have to go off of all the documentation that you provide. And,
yeah.
And you have to say, okay, well, it says it here. This is that. And then the kids become
historians, investigators. They get to actually engage in it. Another one, and this is jumping ahead in time, but in when World War I breaks out, there's this big debate among suffragists about whether or not they should continue to advocate for the vote. Because, flash back a few decades in Susan B. Anthony's time, when the Civil War broke out, they decided we're going to focus on the Civil War. We're going to be nurses. We're going to roll bandages. We're going to, do whatever we need to do for the war effort.
We're going to fight and pick up guns because they did that.
They did that too.
Okay.
And although not the privileged elite Susan B. Anthony's, they did not pick up guns. It was mostly poor women. But the World War I era women, it's a new generation of women, have that history behind them. They know that history. They know that it set the suffrage movement back.
Yeah.
And so they said, we're not stopping. And so every single day during World War I, they lit a fire in front of the White House. They were called the Silent Sentinels, and they stood in front of the White House holding signs, and a lot of the signs included quotes from the president about democracy, which they saw as hilarious.
So good.
Right. It's so great. But the question, the debate is, were they unpatriotic? Because here's a nation at war, a president at war, and admittedly a horrible war. World War I is
tragic,
horrible. And here are women kind of like distracted from the literal effort of like distracting people from the effort of literally saving American, French, German, English lives.
Some could debate if they had the vote. They could be right in that fight with them.
Right. Hey, it's a debate. That's what makes it dire. That's what makes it debatable, important, researchable, and enduring. So the big thing is like, as a teacher, the more I insert my opinion, the less I'm getting them to think about it. And
right.
With my undergraduates, I always say, like, your students, I prepare future teachers. So I have all these undergraduate students who are going off to get teacher certs. And I always tell them, like, your students don't care what you think. And I get a lot of pushback from my class because they're like, we do care. Like, we want to know what our teachers think about stuff. And I think, this is my opinion, but I think that kids want to know what their teachers think to confirm if their teacher, if they like their teacher.
Oh yeah,
if their
it's all about likability.
If their political opinions align with their teachers, because the reality is, if you are liberal and you find out your teacher's conservative, changes how much you take in from what they say.
Oh, totally. It's receptive. Versa. Yeah.
So like.
Well, that's the like me effect, which you can go down a rabbit hole there, but
right.
You'll instantly. It's the same thing as if we don't have more women teaching history. Less women are going to be listening in the class. It's like this whole downward spiral of all that.
Yeah, we need gender equity in all classrooms, and we harp on the fact that there are more men who teach history, but like we also want men teaching other subjects, right? Like, because the men are minorities in every other subject in school, and especially in the elementary school levels. And we want to see them there because we want gender equity, right? Yep. We want boys and girls to have male role models just as much as they have female role models in elementary school. So bringing it back to critical feminist theory to close.
Yeah, let's land this plane.
If you are saying these are the 5 tenets and you have a student in your classroom who disagrees with one of the 5 or all of the 5, you've alienated that person.
You've othered
them. And now you're dealing your challenge is an uphill battle versus if you asked, does liberalism prevent women and people of color from progressive, like radical, quick change?
Yep.
that's a question. I think every one of those 5 should be turned into questions that students investigate. And my hunch is if you put the evidence in front of them, they would actually agree with all 5 of those. But by telling them you haven't made it an inquiry, and it needs to be an inquiry for learning to happen. Because real learning happens when people are holding the evidence in front of them and they go, holy crap, it's all here.
Yep. And they draw the connection.
I
love it. Well, Kelsie, I liked your bomb. I like where it landed.
Thanks, Brooke.
See you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts to bring more voices to the conversation. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time.